Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts is allowing President Trump to remove a member of the Federal Trade Commission. The firing of Rebecca Slaughter will remain in effect for now while the court decides whether to take up the case. CBS News legal contributor and Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson joins me now. Jessica, it's great to see you. You know, most Americans don't spend a lot of time worrying about who sits on the Federal Trade Commission. So can you explain the overarching significance of the Supreme Court saying, yes, this is a quasi-independent agency, but President Trump can potentially remove the Democratic commissioner anyway?
You did most of the work for me there because you teed this up exactly. One, we should note that this is just an administrative stay. Chief Justice John Roberts has said, I want more briefing from Slaughter's attorneys by September 15th. So this isn't a final ruling on the merits. But you asked me basically about the big legal question we're struggling with. And I think it's, again, does the president have the power at its most basic level? But a little bit further down in more detail, does the president have the power to fire the heads of executive agencies? And as you correctly pointed out, these kind of quasi-independent executive agencies. And what the court is going to struggle with next term is the question of whether there can be any limits on the president's ability to fire people, or if the president can just fire people essentially at will. And if there are limits, then what are those limits? What does the president have to show? Does the president have to show, for instance, that there's malfeasance? And of course, we're having the same conversation with respect to Lisa Cook, who's a board member at the Fed.
Right. And the significance here is that when it comes to independent agencies like the FTC or the FCC, they have Democratic members and Republican commissioners. And if you can get rid of the Democrats for no reason, then you're kind of eliminating the built-in opposition to whatever the majority wants to do, right?
Well, that's right. On a broader level, it means that the president can ensure that he only not only gets appointments, but that he can remove people at will and essentially make sure that the people who staff these positions, or I should say the people who lead these agencies, are loyalists to the president and to his administration. That would be a significant change because we previously understood that a lot of these agencies do have not just some independence, but as you said, that there's Democrat members and Republican members as well.
Right.
And of course, we see on the screen.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And it's no small feat to get a new member appointed if one gets fired or let go. It takes time to go through the confirmation process. I do want to switch gears, though, and ask you about another big win for the Trump administration today, because the Supreme Court also allowed it to resume sweeping immigration enforcement stops in the Los Angeles area. Remind us why the lower courts had blocked those stops in the first place.
Yeah, so I'm speaking to you from Los Angeles, where one of our district court judges, Judge Frimpong, had heard a challenge by those who were saying that the way ICE agents were enforcing federal immigration law was problematic. And specifically, under the Fourth Amendment, you need a reasonable suspicion before you detain somebody and, for instance, question them based on their immigration status. Judge Frimpong said you can't rely alone or together on four different factors: race or the color of somebody's skin, the language they're speaking or whether or not they're speaking with an accent, where they are, and the job they're doing. She said that bucket of factors, it's not enough to give rise to reasonable suspicion. So ICE agents basically stop what you're doing. You need more before you detain people. The Supreme Court today put that ruling, that temporary restraining order, on hold while the case plays out.
Jessica Levinson with that expert legal analysis. Thank you so much. And now let's turn to the practical implications with Camilo Montoya-Galvez. Camilo, great to see you. So what does this mean, practically speaking, for those immigration stops that were taking place in Los Angeles? Does it mean they can resume immediately? And can they take place in the rest of the country as well?
Hi, Nancy. This is yet another legal victory for President Trump's sweeping crackdown on illegal immigration. As Jessica underscored, this lower court ruling that was paused today and suspended by the High Court prohibited federal immigration officials from Border Patrol and also Immigration and Customs Enforcement from conducting indiscriminate raids that relied on certain factors such as somebody's race, ethnicity, their occupation as a day laborer, for example, or their presence in a location like a Home Depot parking lot. And those are the operations that triggered a lot of controversy in Southern California, targeting day laborers outside of Home Depots and workers suspected of being in the country illegally in different work sites across Southern California. While the case was only applicable to that region of the country in California, this high court decision, Nancy, could very well undermine other lawsuits that advocates in other states and cities could file against immigration enforcement actions in places like Chicago and Boston. We know that those two Democratic-led cities are now in the crosshairs of the Trump administration's immigration crackdown and could very well see an increase in immigration agents conducting operations in those jurisdictions, Nancy.
Camilo, I want to ask you about another big immigration story with new developments, and that's this huge raid that took place at the Hyundai plant in Georgia. Over the weekend, the South Korean government said that hundreds of workers there who were from South Korea were going to be released, and that the Trump administration was going to allow them to fly home. What do we know about those individuals? Were they all here in the U.S. illegally? And what more can you tell us about what happens now?
Well, Nancy, the Trump administration in many ways is still dealing with the diplomatic fallout from this large-scale operation, which the Department of Homeland Security says is the largest single-site immigration operation, in the history of that department. 475 workers were detained. They are suspected of having worked in the U.S. illegally. More than 300 of them are Korean nationals, according to officials. And this, in many ways, blindsided leaders in South Korea who almost immediately expressed concerns about the legal rights of their citizens being respected here in the U.S. Now we know that that country's government will be sending a charter plane here to the U.S. to pick up the South Korean detainees who have decided to voluntarily return to South Korea. Nancy, that importantly would potentially avoid having those citizens languish in ICE custody indefinitely and facing legal and civil penalties because of those allegations that they were working in the U.S. illegally. Importantly, 23 of the workers have also been identified to be Mexican nationals, and the Mexican government has also said that many of them have agreed to return to Mexico voluntarily and that those repatriations could happen in the coming days, Nancy.
Okay, it's just creating new tension between the U.S. and South Korea over manufacturing here in the United States. Camilo Montoya-Galvez, thank you so much. Appreciate it.